Welcome to today's episode of Peak Market Watch. We speak with market leaders in commercial real estate and related services who have a close pulse on the current market environment. My name is Anton Mattli, co-founder and CEO of Peak Financing, and I'm honored to welcome today Elizabeth Tresp, who is a partner with Tresp and Associates. She also has her own law firm. Tresp and Associates specializes in estate planning and asset protection law. Welcome today, Elizabeth. A pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, Anton. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's we have spoken maybe just about 2 years ago with one of your partners, Kevin Day, and he touched on a number of the asset protection elements. But we thought it might be a good idea to pick up on that and refreshen the issues that everyone should really be thinking about. Particularly with our main audience, we have a lot of investors in real estate, syndicators, passive investors, and so only whoever is a business owner or an investor, and particularly with investments in real estate, where a lot of people think, well, they must be very wealthy, so it's worthwhile to sue them. It's even more important to have proper asset protection in place and order protections in place. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and at the high level, the services that you're offering?
Yes, of course. Thank you. So I am an attorney. I have two law firms that I run, and Tresp and Associates, of course, is a very strong firm, nationally known for our expertise in asset protection. We're very passionate about that, and I'll get into the different aspects of that in a minute. I also have another firm that I grew myself into a mid-sized firm that specializes in trust and probate litigation, as well as estate planning and administration. So we really encompass anything under trust and probate law, planning for passing, dealing with those types of situations, dealing with litigation and incapacity, and then also business law. So a huge part of our practice is helping entrepreneurs, not just in estate planning and asset protection, but also in structuring the best types of structures and in compliance. So I myself am an entrepreneur. I've started numerous businesses. I have businesses in California and then also in Wyoming. And the ones in Wyoming are sometimes more fun. I have a coffee shop and a bakery and all types of stuff. So I'm coming at this from a place of personal experience, as well as an education and business side of it. So one piece that I do want to touch on, I'll focus on asset protection, but I always want to focus on there's a world out there when you're talking about estate planning that covers not just protecting the wealth that you have worked so hard for and keeping that, but also how to pass that on, how to plan for yourself personally. So we are living a lot longer these days, which is wonderful. But that means that there is a specific type of planning that people should be thinking about. And it's a type of planning that goes to the wayside quite often. So in it, you want to set certain appointments and documents out for the instance if you become incapacitated. Okay. And that just means maybe you go into a surgery and the recovery is a long time. Maybe you're in an auto accident. And so you're going to need assistance. In a circumstance, if you were to say have Alzheimer's or dementia and you start losing your capacity, if you don't have these documents in place, then you need a conservatorship. And a conservatorship goes through the court systems. Unfortunately, it's expensive. And it's a situation that you want to avoid if you can. The judges always look at alternatives. Is there an alternative because of that? And this having a power of attorney, having a living trust, there's not asset protection in a living trust. But there is protection in for your mind because you're appointing somebody to step in if you're incapacitated, if you need someone to, and also you're taking control of where your assets go when you pass away. If you don't, the state will through the probate code. So we don't want that. And we talk a lot about privacy, and we'll get into that a little bit more too. If your assets have to go through probate, they're in all that information is in the public record. So you can go on a register of actions and look at a decedent's estate, and there's all this information that is out there for other people to see. When you have a living trust and you have advanced healthcare directives, power of attorneys, the basic pour over wills, those documents, you're really taking control, protecting not only yourself, but also your family. So that's key. And also the holidays are a good time when we're approaching some holidays coming up, sometimes there's family gatherings. It's a good time to talk about things like this. I know it's not going to be the highlight of the evening, but it's important to just touch base and have these types of conversations so that there is transparency.
Yeah, very good point you started out, right? Regardless of whether you're a business owner or not, what you just touched on, everyone should have it, right?
Yes.
And anyone who has elderly parents or family and have gone through a death and then suddenly realizing, or incapacitation, whatever it is, and then realizing that there are no documents there that give you control is extremely problematic, right? And it doesn't matter whether you have a lot of money or not, right? It just this should be something that everyone should have in place. So it's really good that you brought it up as a start, because it doesn't really matter whether you're an employee or whether you're a business owner. That should be in place for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So great that you did that. Now, naturally, as you uh, uh, or grow your wealth and or have your own businesses, it gets a little bit more complicated, and the risks go up there, as you mentioned, whether it's a living trust and related documents. That is really more giving you the opportunity and your family opportunity to keep control, but it's not protecting your assets, right?
That's
Uh,
right.
so, what is once you have that in place, which is the first important piece? What are your recommendations then, taking the next steps to for particularly when you're accumulating wealth and or a business owner?
Yes, I'll talk about this in stages. So, the first point that I want to drive home here is your corporate veil. So, I see very often that people are building, it's exciting, they're putting together deals, things are growing, not keeping your annual compliance documents in order for the different types of entities that you have is going to very much um, take away from the effectiveness of all of your planning regardless of what stage you're in. So generally, right, so we're talking to a lot of syndicators generally, when you're putting together deals, you're going to want to have some kind of entity. Generally, you're going to be dealing with LLCs. I'm sure some of your audience has huge amounts of LLCs that they've created over time. And what you're trying to do, this is called a limited liability company, because you want to keep that liability limited and you want to cover whatever equity that you have in that LLC, limit that liability to the equity that's in that entity. But if you're not doing your annual compliance documents, then you're really putting that at risk. So that's number one. In my experience, Everyone has the best of intentions. I myself, as an entrepreneur, understand how easy it is to not do those types of things, because it's like the cobbler whose kids have no shoes. Sometimes you're not keeping up. You're doing things for everybody else, but you're not doing the things that you need for yourself. Hiring somebody to do these documents is not expensive, but so important. There are numerous different businesses that are based on this. I mean, we do it for people. We do the corporate compliance documents. So sure, if you wanted to go with us, but there are endless people that you can hire for nominal fees to help you keep your corporate veil tight. So that's number one. Okay. You're not going to want to have things in your own name. Obviously, when you have your first level entity, then you want to keep your corporate compliance documents up to date. You also want to make sure that you understand what you have. So oftentimes, because so many entities are being created, because things are moving quickly, having some kind of organizational chart is also very important, because if you're coming up to a point where you're having to sit down and even figure out what you have, you're already kind of in a vulnerable place, because at that point you're not keeping things up the way that you need to do. The next part of protecting assets is privacy, right? So privacy is keeping your name and what you have and your information out of the public record. And there are certain instances where you're not going to be able to do that. For instance, I own Tresp law. Okay. So it's obviously me. I'm here. I'm running it. This is not something that I'm going to be able to do that with. But there are lots of different types of assets and different ways that you can structure things so that you are less visible. And that is really critical, because one of the main points of asset protection is trying to stop a lawsuit before it starts. And the way that you do that is not only having things that are more private, but by taking ownership away from yourself. And I'll talk about how to do that in a bit. That's going to be one of the key points of what we're discussing today. When you're vulnerable to a lawsuit, people often, yes, obviously there's lawsuits. We have an incredibly litigious society. It hasn't reduced. There are people that, especially when the economy is in a place that is difficult for people, they get desperate, and they might handle certain situations differently than if they were in a better financial situation. There are huge amounts of attorneys, and it just keeps getting more and more every year. And a lot of these attorneys are contingency attorneys. So plaintiffs' attorneys generally are going to take a case based on contingency, which means there's a level of risk for them. Someone comes into their office and that person who is filing the lawsuit doesn't have any money. They're not paying this attorney out of their pocket. They're saying, this is something that happened to me. This is very common, obviously, with slip and fall. So in real estate, you have some kind of slip and fall. You have someone whose heel got caught in a sidewalk crack, and then their knee is messed up. All of those types of situations that we hear about all the time. And they say, my medical bills are this much, and these are the circumstances. And the plaintiff's attorney says, okay, well, who is the person? Who are you trying to file this against? Okay, that's the one thing. Is it in your name? Are you visible? Are you still owning this asset? This is different from benefiting from. Owning is different from benefiting, which means the legal owner is different from the beneficial owner. And two, what type of equity do you have out there? What's visible? Do you have a huge amount of equity in your home? Is your home is your home something that you have just in your own name? Is it not in a living trust? Or what type of name is your living trust? Are you the trustee of your living trust? That's also very common. They're going to ask about insurance. How much insurance are we dealing with here? Insurance is generally looked at as deep pockets. I'm not saying don't get insurance. Insurance is absolutely fantastic, but a conversation that you'll have is, okay, how much insurance do I want to get? Does this person own a bunch of businesses in their name? Are there syndication deals in their name? Right? If you're putting a bunch of money into investments, then obviously you have money, and that is something that people can visibly see. That plaintiff's attorney says, okay, yeah, I think this looks like a good case. I'm going to be getting 30, 33, 40% of this. Let's go forward. Versus someone who has asset protection planning and privacy, where at first looking, oh, their house is mortgaged. That doesn't mean it's mortgaged with the bank. You might have a deed of trust with some other entity potentially that you own. Does this person have all of these assets that are visible that are mortgaged or have liens on them? And it makes you look like there's really nothing for them to get. And that's the whole point. Because when a lawsuit is filed, that person, that plaintiff, may not be paying this attorney out of their own pocket, but you will. You have to defend yourself. You have to hire an attorney, respond to the lawsuit, and that's one of the biggest issues with our legal system as it currently is the fact that when someone files a lawsuit against you, if you can't get rid of that based on a demurrer or some other summary proceeding and it goes forward, they're entitled to serve you with discovery. And I don't know how familiar you are with that, Anton, but discovery is incredibly invasive and very time consuming and expensive to respond to. Not only that, it's very stressful. Depositions, I don't know if you've ever had to be deposed, but if you're a party in a lawsuit, they're entitled to depose you. And that also is a very stressful and invasive situation. So when we're talking about this and when we're talking about asset protection, you want to try to avoid the lawsuit before it happens.
Very good. Certainly, very, very good tips there. Being a part of a lawsuit is awful. I have been exposed to that, right? And obviously, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of money, and you really never know how the outcome is at the end, particularly when there is a jury trial, where it makes it even less certain. Even when you believe that you may be on the right side, doesn't mean that you're on the right side. So it's only a good idea to avoid a lawsuit to begin with, if you can avoid it. Now, I think what you brought up is interesting here. Obviously, you cannot hide yourself from the world, right? Yes, you can have various corporate structures. You may have an entity that is serving as your legal representative, but ultimately a lot of lawyers as well as other individuals, they may be able to figure out who is behind it. But what you are essentially highlighting here is that even if someone can figure that out, you need to make to look your entities and yourself not as an attractive target, right?
Yeah, 100%. And the way that we do that is through it's really estate planning, just a nuanced form of estate planning. So there are different ways to do it. We've talked about privacy, we've talked about the entities, the LLCs, the corporate compliance. The next level that we talk about is removing legal ownership. So legal ownership is different to the IRS than it is in a court of law. So the structures that I'm about to touch on, the way we do it generally, and of course it depends on the facts and circumstances of the client that we're dealing with, are tax neutral, which means that any potential benefits that you're currently getting in your structures, the way that you have them, would not change by placing those assets into this type of structure that I'm talking about. So, how do you remove legal ownership in a court of law so that you, under penalty of perjury, can say, I don't own that, right? If it ever gets to the point where that structure is even known. So, irrevocable trusts are wonderful vehicles. We do irrevocable trusts domestically and offshore. Domestic irrevocable trusts for the purpose of asset protection. There's a wide variety of irrevocable trusts. So this one that I'm talking about is for asset protection in this narrow scope that we're talking about currently. Is we put them in a jurisdiction. We generally do Nevada. Nevada has very strong law, and they have a short fraudulent conveyance statute. So just in case anyone doesn't know, fraudulent conveyance statutes are statutes that that have a length of time set out. And if you have say a lawsuit come up and you have transferred assets into this type of structure before for a longer length of time than the statute of limitations, then it's off the table, and that you can't be there. No one can say with merit that you have fraudulently conveyed the assets, meaning tried to get rid of them after this lawsuit has happened, because obviously that's a big no-no, and you don't ever want to be in a situation where you're in that. That's why this type of planning is critical, because people come to us when it's too late sometimes. And sometimes people don't realize, oh, I was just served with this lawsuit. This lawsuit is for 15 million. They've named me personally, and my net worth is only 8. Right? You're in a situation where that's a horrible situation to be in. Whereas you have done strong asset protection planning, and you've done it well in advance of this current issue that you're dealing with. And most often these issues there's so many frivolous lawsuits that are out there. That's really the point here. It's not like you're not trying to pay valid claims. You're trying to avoid being a target because of you having a level of wealth. So in this type of situation where you're creating this irrevocable trust, you're creating it in a jurisdiction, us generally Nevada, we just like it. The law is very strong there. And then in that trust, you're not the legal owner anymore. So when you establish this, you're the grantor. So you're establishing this trust, but you are not in charge of distributions. There is somebody else who is in charge of distributions. It's another trustee. That trustee is looked at as the legal owner. And so in this situation, you've removed that. Okay. What type of assets do you put in here? Well, you're not going to want to put your high level liability assets in here, because those are the ones that are really at risk of being the target of a lawsuit. You're wanting to put your low liability assets in here, which means you're wanting to transfer in cash. Lots of people put cryptocurrency in. They put any level of wealth of value that is a low liability asset. Okay. Are you putting it directly in the trust? Generally, no. Generally, you have an underlying company that you manage, right? So you don't own the assets, but you're able to control them because you're managing this underlying company that these assets are being placed into. So one, you don't own them anymore, but you still get to control them. Under penalty of perjury, you don't own them. So that's the whole point here. There's a distinction between domestic planning and offshore planning. Offshore planning is the next level. So if we're looking at this as kind of steps of protection, sometimes people are building wealth. Maybe they don't have the cash to put out for this type of planning. I will encourage everybody, when you're doing the cost benefit analysis, to understand that, is it worth putting out $15, $18, $30, $35, $40,000 to protect Would you spend that to protect 500,000, a million, 3 million? Probably. You do that cost benefit analysis, you look at it that way, and that's the way it really should be looked at. So you've got the entity, your LLC. Okay, that's one level. That's great. Dividing, you want to separate and divide, right? That's good. Then you have your asset protection trust. It's an irrevocable trust. You can do that domestically. Great. Offshore, you're removing US jurisdiction. That's why these are top level structures, because if you establish a trust in a jurisdiction other than the United States, if someone sues you, is able to locate that you even have the structure, they then have to go to that jurisdiction. And in that jurisdiction, depending on what it is, there's usually an amount of money that you have to put up, whether it's 60,000, it just depends on the jurisdiction, to even file a lawsuit there. It's different than it is in the United States. And so in that type of circumstance, you're removing that your US jurisdiction. So it really is next level. Are you transferring assets outside of the US? Most of our clients aren't. Most of our clients are having an offshore trust. They have an underlying company that's still here, whether in Wyoming, Nevada, where different jurisdictions that we use, and that are great jurisdictions to use, and those assets are still here. Does that mean that transferring things to transferring some assets outside of the US is good or bad? Lots of people do it. It's absolutely fine. Lots of people have obviously Swiss bank accounts, and they diversify, and they're removing, and they're planning for different eventualities. And that's absolutely fine. We generally, as part of our plan, depending on the circumstances, most of our clients are keeping the assets here in the United States. They're just removing that jurisdiction.
Very good. Just adding an additional level of difficulty at the end of the day, right? For
Yeah.
fraudulent lawsuits.
Yeah, I mean, when someone is able to ask you, depending on what the scope of the lawsuit is, when they're able to start digging around in your life, that is such a vulnerable place to be. Any steps that you can take to shield yourself and your family from people that are trying to attack you and trying to take things from you is important. And it's not something that should be overlooked. It's very heartbreaking to have somebody come to me when they've already had a very successful career. They were able to build a large level of wealth. They're hit with a lawsuit. Retainers for defense attorneys, oftentimes, depending on what is at stake, are $1 million. That's just the retainer. So you've got this retainer, you're paying to this attorney. The stress and the indignity of having someone dig through your life is not only very bad for your health, but also you will probably end up settling this lawsuit, regardless of the merit, really, because only about 1% of cases actually go to trial. Judges usually don't even, they encourage you. There's mandatory settlement conferences, there are mediations. They want people to try to work it out. And there are a lot of instances where these are just really money grabs. Maybe this incident didn't actually even happen. We still have to try to defend that. And so if someone's suing you for 5 million, okay, well, if your legal fees are going to be $1 million anyway, are you going to give them some money to make this go away? Probably. And so that's why doing this before the problem arises is so important. And the first step is just consulting with someone about it. Take that step. Talk to an attorney about this type of planning. You need to be careful. So there are people that say that they do asset protection, and what they mean by that is an LLC, or there are attorneys that say that they do asset protection, and they might not fully understand that you can't just transfer jurisdiction. You can't just jump offshore when a lawsuit happens. I see that sometimes advertised. So we've been doing this since the Hague Convention was signed. We're very well versed. We have numerous clients that have had these structures tested, and they're some of our biggest proponents now because they know that it works. And one reason why I am so passionate about this is because I have had people come to me that have already had a very successful career. They've been hit with a lawsuit. They've had to pay a huge amount of money to essentially resolve the lawsuit, because you never know, like you said earlier, what's going to happen when you're in court. Stay out of court. I mean, you have no idea what the outcome of a trial will be. There is absolutely no guarantee ever. And it's knocked them all the way back down, and they're having to restart. And especially when you're already in your 50s or your 60s or your 70s, that's not a place where you want to have to restart. There are lots of us that want to start a new business because we want to. You don't want to have the stress of, oh my gosh, I'm getting older now. Can I even pay for my care? And a lot of people don't think about having long-term care insurance. That's another thing, going back to the very beginning of our discussion, is, have you looked at long-term care insurance? If you want to stay in your home, can you pay for it? Are you able to do that? So that's the heartbreaking part for me. So I feel passionately about this because it is a small output for the benefit that you receive. It is depending on how risk averse you are. Some people say, yeah, it could happen, but it's probably not going to happen. Well, you're probably the person that it's going to happen to. So you taking these steps to try to protect yourself, they really are critical.
Yeah, excellent points. Uh, uh, I have had that experience with long-term care situation with my in-laws. Right, it's when you are protected, you are fine, and obviously, if you not have enough money, it's okay. But I think it's just a lot of people, particularly, and I must say, I was the same when I was in my 20s and 30s. Right, I didn't think about it, but once you actually realize how much all that costs,
Yeah.
it's a massive amount of money. There is no health insurance that pays for it.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, we could have a whole lot of discussion how the system works and what of it works, what is broken.
Mm-hmm.
But it is what it is, right? And I think the important aspect is that we really understand how the system works and where there are holes in it, and
Mm-hmm.
where you need to cover yourself so that you do not run out of money. Right?
No, you're 100% right. And just to put it into perspective, so 10, 15 years ago, in-home care was probably going to run you maybe $10,000 a month, and depending on what type of care. Okay, so there are some people that need round-the-clock care because they're suffering from Alzheimer's to the point where then they just start leaving, they falling, and someone needs to be there to protect. Now, I mean, $7,000 a week is not unheard of. It's just so expensive, and oftentimes, if you do go into a facility, sometimes family members need to hire caregivers to supplement that, essentially, to be there to make sure that the care is to the level that it needs to be for that individual. And so obviously that also is expensive. And so having the foresight to plan for that in advance through either insurance, or if you're able to self-insure, fantastic. But it's hard to know that you're going to be able to do it, because it is ever changing, and expenses are on the rise, and it's very difficult to foresee what health issues you're going to have. Maybe that's good. Maybe it's good that we don't know in advance. Okay, this is going to be the situation, but it does make it difficult for those. So, I mean, talking to professionals about making sure that you have the things in place that you need to just personally, financially, and estate planning wise is just so critical.
Yeah, excellent point. So now you brought up a lot of excellent talking points and what everyone should really focus on and put the house in order. Now the reality is, particularly when you're a business owner and you have been doing this for a number of years, maybe 10 years or more, you have a lot of companies, you have a lot of different structures in place. And so, what do you recommend for individuals like that? Right? You have, let's say, multiple syndications, you have multiple companies, and you think, well, how on earth? I know that I need to fix it, but where do I start? So,
Yeah,
what do you recommend
yeah.
to individuals like that?
What we do is we look at it as a multifaceted approach. And so we'll do essentially a corporate veil analysis. So we look at the structures that people have, we look at the ownership of the structures, and we look at your corporate maintenance that you've been doing, if you've been doing it, and if not, help you rectify that. So that's kind of first level. Obviously, if you don't have an estate plan, we talk to you about your life, your family members, your circumstances, the dynamics, and set plans in place that can accommodate that and reach your goals. And then the other aspect of that is, okay, what do you have? Where does it need to go? Right? What's your liability? What's your how risk averse are you? How what is your financial situation currently versus what you think it's going to be 5, 10, 15 years from now? Let's look at that and try to determine what how high level or how sophisticated your planning needs to be at this point. If you're in the beginning, then we can do a phase approach where, okay, so we're going to establish this type of entity in this period of time. We're going to establish this type of trust. And then in this period of time, maybe we'll move to a different jurisdiction. And so it really is the hardest part for people is starting. So get the conversation started. And one of the things that is so beneficial also when you're doing this analysis is what assets should go where, because it forces you to look at what you even currently have. And so that also is critical, and you should do that anyway, even if you are an all-star and we do all of this planning and you're good to go. Still, every 3 to 5 years or anytime you have a life change, you want to just touch base. Okay, this is something that's changed, or I'm not feeling great about my current, say, life insurance professional. I feel like what I have is out of date. I think there's better products. Or my CPA, I think I might have outgrown my CPA, because CPAs have different levels of expertise. So I think maybe I need to talk to somebody else. We have those professionals in our network that we feel confident in. And so I think using us and other professionals as a resource is going to be really beneficial for you.
Yeah. So excellent point, right? I mean, I cannot even count anymore how many times we get the question, "Oh, what CPA is out there that you could recommend?" Right?
Yes.
Particularly once you're a business owner and uh, you're in real estate, there are not that many that really understand uh, real estate from a CPA perspective and the tax aspects of it. Everyone says claims that they do, but in reality they don't.
Sure.
You also mentioned life insurance. I would say life insurance is probably even a bigger problem, right? It's almost like everyone is trying to sell you something, but you never really know whether what they tell you Is it because they make the commission, or
right.
is it because it's really the right product for you, right?
That's right. That's 100% right. Yeah.
Yeah. So now, obviously, among our listeners, we have a broad range of wealth, right? There might be someone who just has a few 100,000, and your number that have 10 million plus, and way more than that. So once you have a certain amount of wealth, I think it's a no-brainer for everyone that they realize I need to do something. Question I would say is more if you have not that much, where is the point where you would say it's worthwhile to talk to you about this, right? Is it someone who has 100,000? Is it 500,000? Is it 1 million? Where would you say makes it worthwhile? I know you will say, well, everyone should have a protection, right? But
Mhm.
ultimately it's a cost associated with it. So what would you recommend when someone is kind of on the fence, where they do not really know whether they have enough wealth that it's worthwhile to speak with you?
Okay. So for estate planning, everybody now, of course. For corporate compliance, anyone that has any kind of entity structuring. As far as asset protection goes, if you are in the beginning of your wealth growth, you should consult with an asset protection attorney or us to know in advance where you want to go and what you're going to need in place for that journey. So, if we're talking money wise, I can just speak on what most of our clients do. So we have clients that if we're doing domestic, generally people stay domestic. If they have 1.5 million, 2 million, maybe even 2.5 million, they generally stay domestic in their planning. Once you get past that level, almost across the board, people are using an offshore type of structure.
Mhm. Very good guideline there, right? So again, I would encourage everyone to have that discussion at the holiday table, right?
Mhm.
I know it's an uncomfortable thing to discuss, right? Particularly when it comes to discussions among your own family. But I think what is important to understand is, and again, I speak from our own experience, is that very often it's not just you, but you impact your whole family with the decisions that you make or not make, right? And so I think it's important to really think about that, the consequences when you just ignore it, and ultimately someone has to pay for the indecision, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Elizabeth, for coming on. That was great. So how can our listeners reach you?
Yes, thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed our discussion. So, for Tresp Day and Associates, our website is trespday.com. The last name's a little strange, so it's TRESP day.com. And the phone number is 858-755-6672. And so we're here for all of your listeners, for not just education, but also services.
Great. Thanks again for being on with us today, Elizabeth. It was really great.
Thank you so much.